This is Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 323, entitled Masculist MGTOWs don't have to be nice to women. Women's masculist shock. Description. This flyer claims that masculists who are also MGTOWs, that is, have no woman in their lives, can attack the fluffy feminist hypocrites and feminazis with much greater intellectual ideological venom than can most men, since most men are forced to be nice to women because they want to fuck them. When the masculist MGTOWs get on the broadcast media to stop the hated feminazis from genociding whole populations, women will be deeply existentially shocked by the level of venom the masculist MGTOW attack on them. Fire itself. Masculist MGTOWs don't have to be nice to women. Women's masculist shock, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer claims that those masculists who are also MGTOWs, that is, they don't date, don't have a woman in their lives, are free to be a lot more misogynist than nearly most men, since most men are forced to be nice to women if they want to get any sex from women, since, until the sex bots are really with us, it is these women who have monopoly control over access to their vaginas. This much greater level of misogyny that can be expressed by masculist MGTOWs will profoundly shock women who up until now have been deeply accustomed, to the idea that men have to be nice to women simply because they are women. Most women, by the time they're in their 20s, have become very conscious that they possess something that men really, really want, that is, access to their vaginas. Men are powerfully motivated to want to penis women. Such a trait did not only evolve in males, but throughout the male biological kingdom, from the simplest life forms upwards. The urge to reproduce is obviously the most important inherited trait. If one does not reproduce, then all other traits become irrelevant. Women and men are two different species. Most men find women alien, which is why the masculists use the term femalien to express this commonly held attitude of men towards women. Women have severe negative characteristics that men dislike. For example, women's irrationality, emotionality, hysterics, nagging, etc. Everyone has heard of the expression coming from men that, quote, you can't live with them and you can't live without them. Meaning that women are a pain in the ass and yet men are forced to put up with them because men want the sex, men want access to their vaginas that women have monopoly control over. So, most men have learned that if they want to get what they really want, they have to more or less pretend to like women. Even though at a deeper level, most men see women as femalians, with their 10% smaller brains, their 10% lower IQ variance, their much lower testosterone levels, their much lower performance record, their negligible contribution to world culture, their inferior intellects, their awful nagging, etc. Now that men have given women the male-invented contraceptive pill, women choose to have 0, 1 or 2 kids, mostly, and as a result have poured into the workforce, bringing their female traits with them, causing billions of men to feel real frustrations with female work colleagues to such a point there is now a mass movement by men to segregate the workplace by literally moving their desks away from women to escape the eternal femalian chit-chat the female backstabbing, the cattiness, the female prattle that so bores most men. Men tend to prefer to work with other men, and only men, because men are so much easier to work with, because other men are men. That is, they have male brains wired up in the male way, with male brain architectures, male ways of thinking and valuing things. Women, on the other hand, are more foreign, more alien than Asians are to Westerners, or vice versa. Women evolved with very different purposes than men did. Women evolved to want to have babies and to raise them, and to do that they evolved skills to manipulate men, to sexploit them, so that men could be persuaded to give women and their babies male resources, especially male hunted meat that women could not get themselves due to them being constantly pregnant or coping with infants from a recent pregnancy, so were not free to run far from the home chasing game. Women learned millions of years ago, before they were even fully human, that sex was a powerful tool to manipulate men to get men to do what women wanted, that is, to provide women with resources. Women evolved to be prostitutes to men, in order to become better sexploiters of men, to extract resources from men to increase the odds of women and their babies surviving, especially in times of starvation. So women became manipulative, sexually manipulative. You men give me some of your meat, and I, woman, will give you some of my cunt. Women's manipulative nature with men is frustrating for men to have to deal with, especially in the workplace, so it creates a lot of stress for men that men don't get from other men. For example, this phenomenon occurs with me, close to home, namely with my sister and her husband. I've learned from experience that if I have some kind of problem with tech stuff that I know can be answered by either of them, since they have lived their lives in Australia, whereas I've only recently moved here after having lived half a century outside Oz, where I grew up. When this situation arises and I call them for an answer, I prefer to ask my sister's husband than my sister, because I know he will give me a clear and direct answer to my question, whereas I'm much more likely to get some kind of moralistic lecture or comment from my sister, and that pisses me off and raises my impatience. It's the wish on the part of men to not have to cope with femalian moralizing, that millions of men are now segregating themselves in the workplace to escape femalian bother, the extra stress that women generate that they don't get from other men. So, men on the whole see women as femalians, as foreign, as a pain in the ass to be with, if it weren't for the prospect of getting some sex from them, which clouds their judgment and motivates them strongly to be nice to women. Otherwise, there's zero chance a woman is going to let him put his erect penis into her. But if a man is a masculist who is also a MGTOW, men going their own way, then he is not driven to be nice to women in order to get sex. He's therefore in a position to be a lot more emotionally honest about expressing his true feelings towards women's alienness. If women were all to suddenly sew up their vaginas, then very quickly men would ignore women, not bothering with them, not respecting them, for all the reasons mentioned above. Women would quickly find themselves in a manless desert. When the sex bots and the artworms come, this will happen to women. They will be ignored by men because the bots will sex men better than women can, because they will have film star faces, luscious curvy bodies, creamy grippy vaginas, etc., that women cannot compete with. In Oz, that's Australia, 40% of women are obese and hence sexually repulsive to men, utterly cock-shrinking to men. But men don't have to wait for the sex bots and artworms to come to ignore women. Third wave feminism, that is genocentric, women empowering at the expense of men power politics, have made women arrogant and unnurturing towards men, so men find such women less and less attractive. With the fluffy feminist hypocrite takeover of the divorce courts, many millions of young men now refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves. That is, they have gone MGTOW, men going their own way, an important branch of the men's lib movement. Some of these MGTOWs, e.g. like myself, are also masculists. That is, they take an angry, political, activist approach to men's lib, unlike the wimpy, passive, apolitical approach of the MGTOWs, who simply, quietly, passively walk away from the marriage market and paternity. If a man is both MGTOW and a masculist, then he has the opportunity to express publicly his true male feelings about women. And when he does so, this expression truly shocks women, because they are not accustomed to being intellectually and ideologically harangued by angry, gender-politically articulate masculists. I'm learning this from my own experience. I've pretty well given up the hope of finding a female masculist who is sympathetic to men's gender issues, since masculism is almost totally unknown to them. They've never heard of the concept, and hence are usually deeply monoconscious, that is, have only had their feminist consciousness raised and are blind to the ways in which women oppress men. For example, with women's financial parasitism, female manslavery, the fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, the red pill nature of women, that is, not loving men but loving men's sexploitability, women's hypergamy, women's nagging, etc., etc. This monoconsciousness causes women to be gender-biased, anger-biased, seeing men as oppressors and being unaware that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since female oppression of men is sustained over decades, manslaving men into a role that masculist MGTOWs have escaped from, liberated themselves from. The more politically minded and smarter, articulate masculists who are MGTOWs in practice are very conscious that the fluffy feminists are genociders, indirectly wiping out whole populations, since they've taken over divorce courts and are destroying the lives of one father in 4, thus making marriage and fatherhood such a shitty deal for men that young men are now rejecting both in alarming numbers. In many countries now, 2/3 of young men under 35 reject marriage and paternity. If things continue as they are now, then probably within a decade that fraction will be over 90%, so that within a mere generation the population will have reduced to 1/10 of its current size. Hence politically minded masculists see the feminazis as genociders who must be attacked, killed if necessary, in a sex war, so that the gender laws are made men fair, so that men can be persuaded to become fathers again. Many men would love to have kids and influence how they grow up, but don't dare to because of the hated feminazi bitches who are destroying the lives of one father in 4. Hence there's a real need, a political, population-preserving need for men, for masculist MGTOWs, to destroy the feminazis. In the limit, bullets will be used in a sex war that assassinates the gender politicians who made these deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place. For example, in the divorce courts, no paternity rejection right, etc. That murders thousands of feminazi divorce court lawyers and judges. That goes into the streets and simply shoots these feminazi vermin who are killing off whole populations. Probably such shooting won't be necessary, since there are other, less drastic ways to destroy the feminazis. One is to use verbally violent, deeply misogynist diatribes coming from the masculist MGTOWs, who lash out with real venom against the genocidal policies and attitudes of the hated feminazi bitches. The masculist MGTOWs, that is, those MGTOWs who are also masculists, are in a much stronger position to do this haranguing, expressing their hatred of the genocidal policies of these feminazis, causing the whole culture to learn to hate them too. Also, the feminazis obviously have to be stopped, or we wipe ourselves out. This simple lesson has to be learned by the culture, so it's essential that the masculist message gets out into the general public via the broadcast media. If the masculists doing this are also MGTOWs, they will not be held back by the constraint of having to be nice to women. in performing this haranguing role. Those masculists who are not MGTOWs will pay a price. That is, that monoconscious women will reject them and not give them access to their vaginas, which is why the breakthroughs with the broadcast media will probably come from the masculists who are MGTOWs, who will not be afraid to kick up a media shitstorm against the fluffy feminist hypocrites, the feminazi bitches in the media, not caring whether women would reject them if these men approach them sexually, since they are womanless by choice or in practice. When many of these masculist MGTOWs get on the media and let fly with their masculist misogynist venom, then millions of women are going to be shocked. I'm starting to get a taste of this now with the women I give my masculist test to on e-dating sites when I try to assess whether they are female masculists or not, that is, sympathetic to men's issues as well as women's issues. In practice, I'm finding that virtually all women feel a visceral rejection of masculist ideas, probably because at a very deep, evolved level, women know that they are dependent on men for their very survival, and hence feel deeply existentially threatened by masculist MGTOW abandonment of women, and by masculist verbal, ideological, intellectual attacks on women. As more and more masculist MGTOWs attack women in the media, tens of millions of Western women, I predict, will go through a lot of pain when they are rejected by tens of millions of men, as these women fail to adapt to the growing masculist anger and hatred of men towards the hated feminazis and fluffy feminist hypocrites. Women will go into deep shock as they realize that nearly all the quality men they meet in about a decade from now have been infected by the masculist virus and hence do not tolerate feminazi genocide and expect masculist style that women are to grow up, to be responsible adults, to be FIPs, financially independent persons, and not expect to be treated as princess snowflakes. The coming decade is the decade of men, men's lib, freedom from manslavery for men, the destruction and possible annihilation of the feminazis if whole populations are not to be wiped out. There's a lot at stake here. Women have to change. They will be forced to by men, since men have the financial power to force women to grow up, to fit up, to become adults, pulling their own financial weight, to stop dumping on men with their feminazi monoconscious gender and anger bias, to have their masculine consciousness raised, so that they become bi-conscious and lose their feminazi bitchiness, so that men will not reject them, as millions of MGTOW masculists are now doing to women. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Prof. Hugo de Garis at yahoo.com. Website, profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In brackets, contains links to 300 plus YouTube and Minds and BitChute masculist essays/videos, and to the book, Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 300 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Ciao.